Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going behind the scenes of a dynamic macro photo shoot. But we aren't shooting just any ordinary subject. We're going to treat a highly explosive, completely unpredictable piece of food exactly like a difficult talent on a professional set. Yup, we're breaking down the science of shooting popcorn. Okay, so let's just dive right into this. What exactly connects high-end camera gear, intricate lighting setups, and the extreme biomechanics of your absolute favorite movie snack? Well, as you'll see today, capturing something as violent and fleeting as a popping kernel of corn requires this perfect, seamless marriage of artistic technique and, frankly, hardcore science. To even pull this off, the very first thing we need to nail down is the gear. Specifically, how do we literally see our tiny dynamic subject? When we're shooting food photography at this scale, we've got a range of highly specialized options. A mid-telephoto macro, think like 100mm f2.8, is your classic starting point. It's fantastic for getting those life-size details, like catching tiny water droplets, or the way grains of salt cling to a surface. But if you want ultimate versatility, a 24 to 70mm lets you get up close while still providing a slightly wider, more contextual perspective. And then there's the tilt-shift macro lens. This is the really exotic, high-end choice. Because we're working so incredibly close to the popcorn, our depth of field is practically non-existent. A tilt shift actually lets you physically modify the plane of focus. It keeps every tiny detail of our popcorn tack sharp while completely blurring out the background. It's a real game changer. So now that we have our perfect lens, we need to completely isolate our explosive subject. And we're going to do that using a brilliant lighting technique that doesn't even require a physical backdrop. All right, here's the secret sauce. The absolutely crucial first step is to drop your exposure until the background goes totally black. You literally flip your camera to manual mode and check your histogram to make sure every single pixel is pushed entirely to the left. Then, and this is the tricky part, you carefully add artificial light back onto the subject, our little kernel, without letting any of it spill onto the space behind it. Since our subject is so tiny, big lights will easily cause spills, so we need hyper-precise, controlled lighting. Finally, once you've got the shot, you manage that pure black in post-production. You just tweak those shadows to give you an infinite deep void right behind the food. Okay, lighting is set, but to really capture this, we have to deeply understand our subject. And it turns out, a popcorn kernel acts exactly like a tiny pressurized pressure cooker. Our talent gets extremely hot under the collar before it actually performs. We're talking 180 degrees Celsius, that's roughly 356 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the exact critical temperature where the internal water vapor pressure hits roughly 10 bar, and that is the precise moment the outer hull finally fails and bursts open. This thermodynamic threshold is just insanely specific. Check this out. Biomechanical studies show that at 170 degrees Celsius, only 34% of kernels successfully pop. But bump that heat up just 10 degrees to exactly 180, and a massive 96% burst into that spongy, ultra-soft flake we all love. It's the exact breaking point where internal pressure finally overcomes the hull's ultimate strength of around 10 megapascals. Let's see what happens when all that pressure finally gives way and the kernel leaps into the air right in front of our macro lens. Now, what's genuinely wild about this is how popcorn categorizes itself uniquely in the world of physics. It actually sits right midway between two totally different systems of motion. On one hand, it's like an explosive plant that uses fracture mechanics to launch its seeds. But on the other hand, it literally forms a compressed starch leg that kicks against the ground to jump. It mimics how mammals, like us, use muscles as biological springs to form a single projectile. It's this fascinating hybrid of plant fracture and animal-like jumping. I mean, who knew, right? So yeah, our tiny model is basically a world-class athlete. The popcorn pulls off an incredible 490-degree somersault. For context, that is a better rotation than a running human gymnast. It launches with an initial acceleration of about 200 meters per second squared, hitting a vertical velocity of 0.39 meters per second. All that explosive jump energy is just beautifully split into horizontal, vertical, and rotary motion. But as you can imagine, this presents a massive, massive challenge for our photo shoot. All of this explosive energy, the hull fracturing, the starch leg kicking, that crazy 490-degree spin, it all happens in mere hundredths of a second. It completely begs the question, how on earth can we possibly observe, let alone beautifully photograph, this biomechanical marvel? The answer is some seriously extreme technology. Now, standard video is usually shot at 24 or 30 frames per second. To pull this off, we have to use highly specialized high-speed cameras shooting at a staggering 40,000 frames per second. At that frame rate, time essentially freezes. It allows our macro lenses to actually catch the popcorn starch-like compress on the hot plate, launch into the air, and unfurl its spongy interior, all in ultra-slow motion. And we can't forget about the sound. Contrary to what you probably assume, that iconic pop sound, it isn't the hole cracking and it definitely isn't the popcorn hitting the pan. Researchers actually synchronized high-speed video with acoustic recordings and discovered that the sound is caused by the rapid release of pressurized water vapor. The kernel basically acts like a tiny acoustic resonator. It's extremely similar to the popping sound of a champagne bottle cork. Finally, once we have our perfectly lit, ultra slow-motion capture, we want to give it a highly stylized, premium aesthetic in post-production. So even though our physical background during the shoot was rendered as a pure black void using our lighting tricks, the digital world lets us composite our shot with what designers call an ultra background. This is where you add cinematic lighting, dramatic shadows, and deep luxury textures with sleek neon gradients. You might even composite in macro water droplets refracting gorgeous teal and indigo light, or place the popcorn on smooth, glossy surfaces with gentle light flares. It takes a raw piece of food science and transforms it into high-end, photorealistic art. But here's a fascinating little philosophical debate in the photography world. When working with these backgrounds, do you use the digital burn tool to create a pure, flawless, absolute black, or do you leave the natural, warm camera grain intact? Because pure black doesn't really exist in nature. So sometimes leaving just a little bit of that natural variation in the shadows makes the image feel much more organic and pleasing to the human eye. It's definitely something to think about. I'm going to leave you with this final thought for today's explainer. How does understanding the microscopic physics of everyday objects completely change the way we interact with them creatively? The next time you pop a simple snack, just consider how diving into the hidden thermodynamics, the fracture mechanics, and the lighting physics can completely transform your artistic perspective. Once you know a popcorn kernel acts like a jumping gymnast powered by steam, it changes literally everything about how you frame the shot. Thanks for hanging out with me and keep exploring.